What is your personal encounter with the paranormal, ghosts, aliens, sleep paralysis, glitch in the matrix, etc.? My sister had a dream that she was kidnapped and being used as a sex slave in a random basement in an unknown location. Obviously it freaked her out, but that's not the crazy part. The next day her ex-boyfriend called her to ask if she was okay because he had a dream that she got abducted and nobody knew where she was. Not me, but my dad. He grew up in a small village in Greece. One day on his walk home it was storming quite heavily. He was standing under a tree in an attempt to wait it out. As he's waiting, he's approached by a slow old woman who he'd never seen before. She had an umbrella in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She asks him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm waiting out the storm so I can go home. I don't want to catch a cold." She tells him, "You have a long life ahead of you. I would risk catching a cold if I were you." And with that, she starts to slowly walk down the street and out of sight. My dad waits for a few more minutes and takes her advice. He starts walking home. A few more minutes pass and he hears an explosion. He turns around and sees the tree he was waiting under was hit by lightning and blew up. Frightened, he runs to his home, hoping to bump into the old woman to thank her, but he never sees her again after that encounter. He's convinced she was a paranormal being, since he never caught up to her that night. Even though she was so slow, he had never seen her in the village before or after that moment, and no one knew who he was referring to when asking around for her. Mine isn't scary in the slightest, but I like to think of it as a weird glitch in the matrix. One summer afternoon, when I was younger, my family heard the music of an ice cream truck coming down our road. Ice cream trucks never come down our road. We ran outside and placed our orders and expressed our astonishment to the woman inside. "Really?" she said. "I come down this road every week." "Sure you do," we all responded. She drove off and we never saw her again. I'm sure it was just a mistake on her part, but I like to think there's an alternate reality where we get ice cream trucks down our street every week. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was on my way to Home Depot when I arrived at this stoplight. After sitting there about 15 or so seconds, the light turns green. As soon as it did, I felt like I couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like something was telling me to not go just yet. After about a second or two, this red Ford Explorer barrels through the intersection, running the red at what must have been about 50 miles per hour. IDK how much exactly, but it went ridiculously fast. After the car sped through the intersection, I could move again. I don't know what that something was, but had it not been for that, I would have probably not been able to tell you all this little story. I don't know if this was some weird coincidence, but when I was 14 I was staying the night at my friend's house and we decided to sleep in the guest room instead of her own bedroom. She kept telling me she thought the room was haunted, and I thought she was just trying to wind me up, but just before she went to sleep she mentioned it again. At that moment, everything suddenly went really cold and the radio randomly switched on and started making weird static noises, even though nothing touched it. My friend refused to sleep in there ever again. Growing up, my sister and I were good friends with our neighbor, Matt, who had a dog, Molly. Molly ran away one day, so the three of us set out into the nature preserve behind our houses to look for her. Matt's brother, Chris, set out separately. In the preserve is an old dam/mill from the 1700s that is rumored to be haunted. When we got to the mill we saw Chris and the dog on the other side of the river, maybe 30 yards away. "Matt, I got her. I'm bringing her home," Chris yelled. But something didn't feel right, and the three of us gave each other that look. We headed home knowing Chris would be a bit behind us, since he'd have to go a mile or two out of his way to cross the bridge. When we got home there was Matt's mom and the dog. She was under the porch the whole time, she said. A little while later Chris showed up, having never even gone into that part of the woods. I think I lived in a haunted dorm room. My roommate and I kind of assumed the previous tenants were joking when they said they summoned a ghost, but it felt like bizarre unexplainable nonsense was constantly happening in that room. About once a week, we would both wake up from a dead sleep at the same time, usually 3:06 AM, and both our phones would be glowing, or the radio and the TV would turn on simultaneously. One night we were laying in bed and everything on top of my roommate's wardrobe fell to the floor. Our toilet water turned red one day and stayed black for like 2 months. Then went back to normal. It was never clogged and kept working just fine. It just looked really off-putting. When we were showering, the shower curtain would get yanked open. Over spring break, I was one of maybe 12 people staying on campus. I woke up one night to loud snoring coming from my roommate's empty bed. I laid as still as I could for what felt like forever until it finally grew quieter and quieter, terrified of what would happen or what I would see if I rolled over. It was constant and always felt creepy and slightly malicious, like the ghost was just fucking with us. One afternoon though, that changed. I'm not a napper, like at all, but that day I just really needed a nap. I curled up under a blanket at the foot of my bed facing the door. At some point, I very groggily woke up and could tell someone was in the room, watching me. I was scared at first, but when I opened my eyes, I saw the vague outline of my grandpa standing in the doorway. It was like a wave of relief. I felt so safe and comforted by his presence. That semester was really challenging for me, but it felt like he was checking in to make sure I knew I would be okay. I've never shared that with anyone because I just knew it was him. There wasn't like cool concrete proof or anything, but all the weird shit from our other ghosty friend stopped after that. I was trapped in a recurring dream over an extensive period of time where I had to get out of a skyscraper. The top floors were more research based, while the bottom ones were centered around reception with things like art and sculptures on display. For a decent portion of time, I couldn't escape the building, but every additional time I had the dream, my previous self guided me past the place of my initial mistake. By the time I got out of the building, it felt like I had decades into the future. We lived in the same house with my grandparents. I was almost 3 years old when I walked into the kitchen where grandma and my parents were just talking, and I said, "Did you see grandpa? He has just flew away." A few minutes later the phone rings and you can guess the rest. I don't really remember OFC, but grandma says that anytime she thinks about that, it's a relief because it reminds her that there is something on the other side. I'm not into spiritualism or anything, but I'm glad if it helps her, and I think the story is kinda creepy. In my hometown in northern FL, we would sometimes get a thick fog that was terrible to navigate. I was always told by my grandparents that if I ever saw Confederate soldiers walking in that fog, keep my head down and move along, even if they talk to me. Rare advice for the South. As for Yankee soldiers, I was to nod and point them in a direction if they said they were lost. And if I ever ran into a woman in a white dress named Caroline, don't tell her your name and excuse yourself before she touches you. When I was little, maybe 5, I would walk into my parents' bedroom to crawl into bed with them. Many times when walking into their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed. I would be paralyzed with fear, but being young I don't think I understood what I was seeing. I would take agonizing steps forward until I could crawl into bed and then cover myself completely in their blankets. She never moved, spoke or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. One night I was going to sleep and all of a sudden I started sweating profusely. I tried to get up and turn on the AC, and I could not move from my bed. I was confused and a bit scared. I tried to shout to my sister in the next room over, and I couldn't talk either. At this point is when I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke. It muttered in a distorted voice, "You are not safe." At this point I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew the figure moved across the room and to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat and that night I did not sleep. To this day I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I still wonder if I'm really safe. First and foremost, I'm a skeptic, so I'm not going to over dramatize this, so apologies if it isn't that entertaining, but I like to share it. My great grandmother always said throughout her life that if there was something after death, she would give a sign. She died alone in a nursing home, and after a very long day we all returned to her family home with her husband, my great grandfather. We stayed with him that night so that he wasn't alone. Long story short, we all went to bed around midnight. Not long after that, the phone starts ringing. There's no one on the other end. This happens a few times. In the UK you can dial 1471 to trace the call. The call was untraceable. This happened a few times before it ended. This, as a skeptic, was the first time I'd considered something to be unexplainable. It brought great comfort to my family, so paranormal or not, we like to think that it was my great-grandmother saying this is the only sign I could send and I'm okay. My mum's experience with what she thinks was a ghost. She went outside around 10 PM for a cigarette years ago and saw a very elderly woman walking up our neighbor's back stairs to their veranda. Mum said she wanted to ask if she was alright. It was very rare for our neighbors to have visitors that late. They were also elderly, but Mum said she completely lost her voice and felt stunned, though she couldn't look away. She ended up getting out a hello and the woman just disappeared. The next morning Mum made a joke to our neighbors asking why she wasn't invited over for their nightcap with their visitor and they very casually replied, "Oh, so you've now seen our ghost too." They were excited over it and not at all scared. Berry, neighbor, says an elderly lady follows Elwin, his wife, everywhere and they feel pure comfort around her, but their own children and grandchildren are frightened by the lady on the stairs when they stay. My wife of 22 years died earlier this year. She was every bit the happy homemaker. Every day after I went to work, and she would make our bed like a soldier in basic training. It had to be just perfect, including the massive pile of throw pillows we had to unload every night and stack on a small couch in our room. During the last few months, when she became bedbound, I of course had to take over all the cleaning duties, which did not include a daily making of the bed. So the pillows remained stacked on the couch for months without moving. The night she died I was awoken by the sound of a fan in our room being knocked over. I turned on the light and the pile of throw pillows, which had not moved in months, fell into the floor and knocked over the fan that was about 2 feet away from the couch. I piled them up back on the couch and got back into bed. I checked the time to see how long I had been asleep. It was 2:12 in the morning. My wife says February 12th. One day I was alone in the backyard at my boyfriend's house, swinging on the porch swing, when I saw his black lab slowly walking towards me. Eventually she made her way to me and sat down right in front of my legs, so I stopped swinging. She looked me in the eyes and all of a sudden I got this overwhelming feeling that she was going to die. She seemed sad, a little scared and confused. I got the feeling that she needed comfort and reassurance, so I sat there with her and stroked her ears and fur, telling her how good she was and that everything would be okay. Telling her that she was loved and to not be afraid. After a few minutes she seemed to feel better and began to wander off again. I told my boyfriend that he needed to pet his girl and give her kisses, and he did. I didn't fill him in on my experience with her just moments before. The next day he called me crying. His mother had accidentally ran over his dog when she was backing out of the garage, and unfortunately she was so injured that they decided to put her down. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happened to me, and it has happened to me with people too. I don't know why I can sense others' death and don't really know what to do with this kind of info. His dog's death struck a chord with me though, because she was young and healthy and she sensed her death coming too. Most animals and people are surprised by their endings that I have witnessed anyway. My old apartment building, I would always see a cat. Kinda skinny black cat. I have a cat, but the cat I was seeing was not mine. I know it wasn't a real cat because it was in my apartment and I hadn't actually seen it, just glimpses of it. Well, one night my actual cat was already on my bed. Well, I felt another cat jump on the bed. My cat frizzed up and started hissing. She hardly hisses at anything. I definitely wasn't dreaming. Edit, my girlfriend and I would both see it. And it would be random at all times of the day. My sister lived in the same building as us for a while. I had never told her about it, thinking I was going crazy. One day my sister and I were out, and she told me she kept seeing what she thought was a black cat in her apartment. Sent chills up my spine, but I tried not to make a conversation about it. I grew up with a strange mom. We don't really talk anymore. She was a paranormal investigator when I was growing up. There are loads of stories there. When I was about 3, there is video footage of me coming downstairs as angry as could be. Not temper tantrum angry, but in the video I keep yelling at my mom that they won't let me play with my toys. She tried to ask me who I just kept angrily telling her that they wouldn't let me play with my toys. We didn't get a cat until I was 4, but before that, there was some kind of cat creature in the house. I had seen it in my mother's closet once. Another time I remember being woken in the middle of the night, but a cat yowling in my playroom, the next room over. I could see a shadow under the door before I opened it and heard a hiss. Upon opening the door there was nothing there. As I got older things got stranger. After my mother got back from the catfish plantation, strange things started happening. We could hear someone running up and down the stairs at night. Shoes would be thrown down the stairs. My most vivid memory of this time was me sitting on my mom's bed. We had no pets at the time, and it was just me and her. Her bathroom was attached to their bedroom. She was the kind of woman that had 20 almost empty bottles on the side of the tub. While watching Barney one day, it sounded as if someone had stuck their arm out and just swiped all the bottles into the tub at once. My mother came around the corner yelling Jeremy. Turned out Jeremy was the name of a young man who was a slave at the plantation she had visited. He had fallen off the back of a hay wagon and died. After that day she got back in her car and drove back to the plantation and all of the strange happenings stopped. Also now she believes she's an alien. So, that's a whole other story. Lol. I have several, but the first I remember is when I was 4/5 and I lived in a house 3 houses up from a graveyard. I was asleep and woke up to a noise and saw a cat walk through my dresser. We didn't have any pets. Years later my grandmother told me she saw that same cat a few times when she came to visit. Another night I was sleeping and my arm was hanging off the side of the bed and something was breathing on my fingers. Needless to say I'm terrified of any body part being out from under the covers when I sleep. My mom told a story of seeing a soldier sitting on our porch when she pulled into the driveway. The scary part was we were home with my dad at the time and were sleeping. She said when she got out of the car he was gone, but she knew she had seen it. Watched this movie when I was around 9 or 10. Watched it with my whole family, and as it was happening I kept saying, wait, I've seen this movie before. My sister said that's impossible, this movie just came out. Yet I was able to recite every scene and exactly what was going to happen. My family was freaked out because they just rented this movie and obviously they didn't go with me to the movie theaters to watch it with me. I don't know why I knew everything that was going to happen in the movie, but I just did. And to this day I have no explanation as to why I had already seen a movie that I had never watched before. I still haven't been able to find the name of the movie anywhere, which is another mystery. But it was about this girl who has a hit and run of an older man one night coming home, and she doesn't want anyone to find out, so she hides him in her garage. I remember the end of the movie ending with the guy lighting the garage on fire or something. Does anyone know what movie this is? I've been trying to find it for years. My parents' house has a ghost. When my sister, 42, was about 5 she started talking about the Green Lady. Of course us older 3 sisters made fun of her a lot. She continued for several years talking about the Green Lady. Then one day when I, 48, was in middle school, I went upstairs and heard a whooshing sound. I turned to see what it was. There was a lady with a long green dress, like from the 1800s, and dark hair tied up really pretty. Then just like that she was gone. I never saw her again, but my mom took in a little boy for a while for a family that needed us when I was in high school, and he always talked to a lady upstairs when he was alone. He was only 3 when he stayed with us. Also, lots of weird things happened in my parents' house. Cupboards would open and shut on their own and the water faucets would turn on by themselves. I don't know the history before our house was built, but it would have been newly claimed land in the early 1800s. My grandmother passed away when I was 14. Shortly after, I was home alone walking through the family room. My grandmother always wore a specific perfume, and I've always been super sensitive to smell, so when I caught a whiff of it as I was walking I immediately associated it with her. I think she was checking in on me. I was the only one in the house, besides my dog, but he wasn't the type to get into things, and we didn't have anything that smelled like that in our home. Also, I had a coworker pass away a couple years ago. The coworker was a part of a family who all worked at the restaurant together. A few times in the months after her passing, one of the fryer baskets would just drop randomly without anyone even being near it. My manager and I figured that it was my coworker letting us know she was still around. The house I grew up in had a friendly spirit. It was a woman in a white gown. Sounds scary, but when you saw it, it would make you feel at ease. I believe both my parents, my nana and I all saw it at different times. Another time my family was touring a fort on the coast of Ireland. I looked over to a big dark opening in the brick wall and watched a figure walk into the darkness. This was a section of the fort that was off limits. Not a minute later, our tour guide tells us a story of a man that was killed in an explosion in that area. I believe it was where they stored the gunpowder, and that he has been seen on several occasions walking through the courtyard. Of course, having not spoke up right away, no one fucking believed me, but I will take this to Tinge fucking grave. Ain't nobody can tell me ghosts ain't real. Dad was out with his GF about 2 hours away from home, and I had the house to myself. I was showering about 4 to 7 hours before I expected them to return, and I heard our garage door open. It had a very distinctive sound due to the way it echoed through the kitchen and across the open plan, tiled house. Immediately heard the clicking of his GF's boots and knew it was her from how short she was compared to the rest of the family. She walked like she had to prove something to make up for her height. She was definitely saying something to my dad too as she entered, and I could hear him say something back. Since it was so early for them to be home, I had a feeling something was off. I was already basically done with my shower, so I hopped out and threw on a towel, opening the door and looking down the hall and across the house for them. I absolutely pulled the horror movie rookie move of investigating in a towel. Walked the length of the house, saw the gate outside was still closed, opened the door to the garage and saw it empty, and even did an extra loop to rule out me missing something. I was 100% home alone still. This wasn't the first time I'd heard something home alone. It was just the most distinct. My whole family has heard the slider doors open. When I went car shopping with my dad, my sister heard the garage door and the door into the house from the garage open. No one came home then either. My dad has seen people on the property at 3 AM, but they are gone without a trace and too fast for a real criminal to be snooping. The house just makes noises that imitate us and aspects of the home. The walls don't bleed though, so we still live there. Man, I've had a lot of eerie stuff happen to me, but I definitely will never forget a dream I had back years ago. I remember I fell asleep in my mum's room, and I thought I woke up in the middle of the night. The room was really dark, but it just felt off. My mom's closet was open, and I noticed a transparent human figure peeking out. I closed my eyes and remember thinking I thank God it was just a dream. I opened my eyes and there it was hovering over me. I tried reaching for my mom and wanted to scream for help, but I physically couldn't do anything. Being raised Catholic, my mom always told me if I had a nightmare to just pray the Lord's Prayer. I began reciting it in my head, and that was when I was able to actually wake up. Sleep paralysis is fucking wild. Back in 2001 I left for college and my family moved into a house on a lake. My younger siblings were kids at the time and claimed they would see handprints appear along the walls in the downstairs hallway, so they generally avoided hanging out there. Since I never really lived in this house after college, I completely forgot about it. Fast forward to this past November, COVID-19 is raging, so I flew back home to be with my parents, since the B-level house allows me to quarantine for 2 weeks downstairs. During my isolation I started feeling a really deep gratitude that we had this house right now that allowed me to be with my family safely. I would periodically walk up and down that hallway, placing my hand along the walls and saying a little prayer of thanks. It was maybe the third or fourth time I did this when I suddenly remembered the story of the handprints from years ago. Pretty interstellar if you ask me. My friend and I were driving through Michigan after meeting a breeder for a dog. It was a long dark highway, and as I was driving a bright green light passed through the sky. It started and streaked through the sky. I kept driving, and about 5 minutes later I said, "Did you see that light?" My friend just looked at me and said, "You saw it too?" We both thought we were crazy. It was stationary for about 5 seconds, then moved super quick at a 30 to 45 degree angle. I couldn't explain it away. We were pretty quiet the rest of the way back to our hotel. I totally believe there is life off Earth. but never thought I would see something like that. Totally weird. To this day, have no idea what it was. Whoop. I'm usually super late for these, but I've shared a couple of my stories before. Here's one of them. I lived in an apartment complex for 7 years, middle to high school, and experienced a whole lot of weird stuff, many with witnesses. But the most unnerving was this. I was laying in bed just getting comfy. I was rolled onto my side facing the wall when I felt someone sit on the bed behind me. I thought maybe my mom came in, and I turned to look, but there was no one. I could still feel the dip in the bed. The door was closed, the light was off. I was totally alone. I was freaked out, so I rolled back over and stared at the wall, trying to get the courage to reach over and turn the lamp on. Well, suddenly I felt whatever was sitting there lay down and put an arm around me. I felt the pressure of an arm on my side. I felt the dip of weight behind me. I was too scared to move at that point, since I didn't want to turn around and see what was there. Eventually, I fell asleep. Nothing stranger than usual in the morning. Well, I have a few stories, and I believe that until you experience something paranormal, you'll never truly believe it's possible. So I completely understand if no one buys what I'm about to say. A family member of mine passed away 7 years ago. A few months after he passed away, I had a dream where he visited my house. He was walking around throwing water everywhere. I fully believe he was visiting me. After that, weird little things started happening around the house. Hearing things that could easily be passed off as a house making regular house sounds. And then some unexplainable things happened. I should mention, it was completely in his personality to mess with all of us when he was alive. In 2019, my best friend and I were hanging out in my room, watching movies, talking, whatever. I have a connected bathroom and the door to this bathroom wasn't fully shut. It was open about an inch. As we're talking, she notices the door looks more closed, and she points it out. Well, that's weird. None of us had gone to use the bathroom. This door doesn't close by itself. I've lived in this house since I was a kid and the door always has to be forced closed. I explained that to her, and we stay watching the door. That door slammed closed while we were looking at it, and we screamed our heads off and ran out of the room. Goosebumps everywhere. I knew immediately it had to be my cousin. He had to be messing with us. It's absolutely something he'd do. My best friend is terrified of using that bathroom now. There's more stuff, but then this comment will get too long, and I'm already annoyed by how long it already is. I several times thought I saw a kindly looking little old lady standing guard over my son's bed when he was a baby. I would have moved or done something because it was so clearly there for a second. However, she was also clearly smiling down at him with affection and looked protective. I can't explain it better. At any rate, I didn't mention what I saw. After we moved, my wife told me she had seen what I saw. Never saw anything like her again.